615 horsepower in 1965. Let that sink in. No computers, no traction control, just Detroit fury and a lead foot. Ford didn't just make a fast Mustang, they built a street-legal monster that could outrun Corvettes and GTOs before Shelby even rolled up. Most people never even knew these Mustangs existed, but today, you will. Were these forgotten Fords the fastest of their time, or just urban legends? What kind of mad genius buried race car power into a kid's car? And here's the real twist. The deadliest Mustang of the 60s, it wasn't the Boss 429, it wore no stripes, made no promises, but it delivered. This wasn't just horsepower, it was rebellion on wheels, and it changed the Mustang forever. Let's kick things off with, and trust me, one is the Mustang even Ford tried to forget. Number 10, 1966 Mustang GT K-Code, Hypo 289. Before the bosses, before the big blocks and factory drag monsters, there was the K-Code. The 1966 Mustang GT, with the high-performance 208.9 cubic inch V8, didn't scream for attention, it whispered confidence. Just 271 horsepower on the brochure. But those in the know understood what Ford was really selling. A sports car in pony clothes. No power steering, no automatic, no air conditioning. Why? Because this car wasn't built for comfort, it was built for the guy who wanted to feel everything. When you turned the key, it didn't rumble, it barked. Solid lifters chattered like a typewriter at red line. The exhaust snapped like a live wire. It revved high, loved to be pushed, and rewarded fearless drivers with a snappy, visceral experience. Unlike the later muscle-bound Mustangs that used brute force to crush the road, the K-Code was about finesse, precision power with lightweight agility. It taught a generation how to drive fast, not just mash the pedal and hang on. To own a K-Code in the mid-60s was a badge of pride. It wasn't flashy, but it was respected. These cars were often street-raced, autocrossed, or parked outside speed shops with headers hanging low and glass packs glowing red. For many older enthusiasts watching now, the K-Code wasn't their first car, but it might have been the first real car they wanted, the one they begged their dad to co-sign for, the one they spotted in a neighbor's driveway and couldn't stop thinking about. And that's what makes it so unforgettable. It didn't just move the Mustang forward, it lit the fire. Number 9, 1967 Mustang GTA 390. By 1967, the Mustang had grown up. It got wider, longer, a little more muscular, but also heavier. That meant it needed more grunt to keep up with the big boys. And Ford answered with the 390 FE V8. Slotted into the GTA, the automatic version of the GT, this was a gentleman's street fighter. 320 horsepower, and a tidal wave of torque, paired with a smooth shifting C6 automatic transmission, made it perfect for guys who wanted muscle without the stick-shift hustle. The 390 wasn't a rever, it was a torque machine. Plant your foot, and the hood rose like a speedboat lifting off the water. The dual exhaust would roar, and the Mustang lunged forward like it had something to prove. And in 1967, it did. Chevy had just dropped the Camaro, and the Mustang needed to hold its ground. The GTA did exactly that, with poise and punch. It was the kind of car that made a middle-aged guy feel 25 again. Tailored suits by day, tire smoke by night. It wasn't as nimble as the K-Code, and it didn't have the track pedigree of a Shelby, but it had presence. Chrome-trimmed fastback or coupe, the GTA looked the part. You saw it at diners, at drag strips, at high school parking lots where it instantly earned respect. And today, it's the forgotten gentleman of the Mustang world. Not as flashy as what came later, but undeniably part of the legacy. The bridge between pony car and muscle machine. Number 8, 1968 Mustang GT 428 Cobra Jet. Factory drag pack. By 1968, the gloves were off. Street wars were raging between Ford, Chevy, Dodge and Pontiac. Everyone was stuffing the biggest engines they could into mid-size cars. But Ford, they were holding something back, until April 1968 when they unleashed the 428 Cobra Jet. This wasn't just a hot motor. It was Ford's secret weapon, developed behind closed doors by engineers who were sick of watching Mustangs get walked by GTOs and Mopars on the quarter mile. Rated at a laughable 335 horsepower to fool insurance companies, real tests showed the Cobra Jet was pushing over 410 horses and more than 440 lb-ft of torque. It wasn't a Mustang anymore. It was a drag car with license plates. With the factory drag pack, it came with 3.91 gears, external oil coolers, heavy-duty internals, and a warning: this car is not for the faint of heart. Owners talked about how the front end would lift under throttle, tires would scream in every gear, and yet it still had that Mustang charm, the fastback silhouette, the galloping pony, the clean lines. But under the hood, pure hellraiser. For the men who bought these cars in the spring of '68, it was more than a car, it was rebellion, a statement. And for many, it was the last wild thing they bought before life got serious. Marriage, mortgages, minivans. But the memory of that Cobra Jet, the way it pinned you back in the seat, never faded. Number 7, 1969 Mustang Mach 1 428 Super Cobra Jet, SCJ. If the Cobra Jet was Ford throwing a punch, the Super Cobra Jet was a haymaker. In 1969, the Mustang lineup exploded. New designs, new badges, and new muscle. And leading the charge was the Mach 1. But not just any Mach 1, the rare, thunderous CJ with the drag pack. This was a car built not for cruising, but for conquest. The SCJ had forged pistons, beefier internals, a balanced rotating assembly, and a roar that could wake the dead. Though still officially rated at 335 horsepower, wink wink, it was easily pumping out over 425. Quarter-mile times were in the low 13s, and with slicks you could dip into the 12s. This was race car territory, yet it was sold at your local dealership. Visually, the Mach 1 was stunning. Hood scoop, blackout treatment, chin spoiler, rear louvers, it looked like a missile on wheels. And when you fired it up, it sounded like one too. This car was for the man who had outgrown the boy racer Mustang. He didn't want stripes, he wanted scars. He wanted to win. The SCJ wasn't common. These cars were expensive, hard to handle, and unforgiving if you didn't know what you were doing. But for those who did, it was the ultimate weapon. A car you remember, not just for how it looked or sounded, but for how it made you feel. Alive, free, untouchable. Number 6, 1969 Boss 302 Mustang. If the Super Cobra Jet was the heavyweight brawler, the Boss 302 was the middleweight boxer with lightning-fast hands. Built to dominate Trans Am racing, the Boss 302 was lean, mean, and purpose-built. It didn't care about straight lines, it lived for the corners. It was the Mustang you bought if you drove, really drove. The 302 engine was a high-revving masterpiece, forged crankshaft, solid lifters, large port heads, and a nasty appetite for RPM. While it was rated at 290 HP, real-world testing and racing data showed it was much closer to 350. But it wasn't just the engine. The Boss 302 had suspension tuning, quicker steering, and better balance than almost anything else in Ford's lineup. It was a driver's car. Aggressive, planted, responsive. Visually, it was a menace. Stripped of chrome, adorned with matte black accents. It looked ready to fight. And in many ways it was. This was Ford's answer to the Camaro Z28. But it wasn't just a factory response. It was a passion project. Designed by Larry Shinoda, who'd worked on the Corvette Stingray, the Boss 302 looked and felt like a track car that snuck onto public roads. For many older enthusiasts, the Boss 302 is a symbol, not of power alone, but of precision. It was the Mustang that said, "We can go fast, but we can also do it with finesse." And for the few lucky enough to have driven one back in the day, the memory of its howl at 6,000 RPM still rings in their ears. Number 5, 1967 Shelby GT500, 428 Police Interceptor. By 1967, Carroll Shelby had already proven that a Mustang could dominate a racetrack, but now it was time to flex on the street. The GT500 wasn't a nimble corner carver. It was a statement, wide-shouldered, menacing, and powered by a 428 Police Interceptor V8. This was the Mustang for the man who wanted to terrify traffic. Officially rated at 355 horsepower, real-world numbers edged much higher, with torque so abundant it felt like gravity shifted when you hit the throttle. You didn't just drive a GT500, you commanded it. This was the car you parked nose out, not because it looked better, but because you might need to leave fast. It was raw, loud, and rebellious. Like the rock and roll of the late 60s made mechanical. Inside, it had extra gauges, roll bars, and racing seats. Shelby's way of saying, this isn't a Mustang, it's a weapon. For many men, the GT500 was the car that lived in posters, in dreams, in garage conversations that started with, "one day." And for the few who owned one, they never forgot the sound it made at 4,000 RPM, or the way people looked at them when they pulled up. Number 4, 1969 Mustang Boss 429. You didn't buy a Boss 429, because you wanted a fast Mustang. You bought it because you wanted a race engine, and Ford just happened to wrap it in a Mustang shell. Built purely to homologate the 429 Hemi Crusher for NASCAR, only 859 Boss 429s were made in 1969, and each one was hand-built, not at a Ford factory, but at Carcraft, a specialty shop where Mustangs were torn apart and rebuilt to handle the monster motor. The 429 cubic-inch semi-Hemi was a masterpiece: massive ports, forge internals, magnesium valve covers, and dry deck block design. It was conservatively rated at 375 horsepower, but insiders knew it made over 500 in factory trim, and even more with mild tuning. This wasn't a car you redlined on a side street, it was a car you respected. To fit the engine, Ford had to modify the shock towers. The battery was moved to the trunk, the inner fenders were reworked, and the hood, huge, with a scoop so aggressive, it looked like a war machine. Driving it wasn't for the timid. The Boss 429 was heavy up front, stiff and loud, but once it got rolling, it pulled like a freight train on nitro. To Mustang purists, the Boss 429 is sacred. It's not just a car, it's a piece of engineering rebellion. And for collectors, it's the holy grail. Number 3, 1968 High-Half Mustang 428 Cobra Jet. Lightweight, NHRA ready. Imagine walking into a Ford dealership in mid-1968 and finding something completely out of place. A Mustang, with no sound, deadening, no insulation, no frills, just brute force. This was the lightweight Cobra Jet, built in extremely limited numbers for NHRA stock and super stock drag racing. Less than 100 were made, and they were freaks in the best possible way. Under the hood was the same brutal 428 Cobra Jet engine, but the body was stripped of anything that didn't make it faster. Thin glass, aluminum bumpers, fiberglass hoods. Some had radio deletes. Some had nothing but bare steel inside. These cars weren't built to cruise, they were built to win. Quarter-mile times dipped into the low 11s with proper slicks. Some even cracked 10s with mild tuning. At local tracks, these cars were feared. You didn't line up next to one unless you were ready to go home humiliated. And the best part? They wore stock Mustang badges. No wild paint, no race livery, just a clean, unassuming shell hiding a ticking time bomb. For many men in the late 60s, these Mustangs were the ultimate dream. The kind you saw once at a strip, then never again. Gone in 11 seconds. Number 2, 1969 Shelby GT500 KR. King of the Road. They called it the KR, King of the Road, and for good reason. This was the last of the true Shelby Mustangs before Ford took over full production, and Carroll Shelby made sure it went out with a bang. Under the hood sat a 428 Cobra Jet, just like its drag strip cousin, but tuned and polished for both brutality and sophistication. Rated at 335 horsepower, but again, we know the truth. These cars made over 400, with gobs of torque, delivered smoothly and relentlessly. But what made the GT500 KR special wasn't just the speed, it was the way it felt. The KR blended performance and presence. It was leather-wrapped adrenaline. It had style, power, swagger, and when it showed up to a stoplight, everyone paid attention. Inside, it was refined, high back buckets, wood grain trim, a dash full of gauges. Outside, it was mean, functional scoops, wide tires, dual exhaust. It was the kind of car you drove if you had something to prove and the paycheck to back it up. Many remember the GT500 KR as the last Mustang before things started to change. Emissions, insurance crackdowns, and a shifting culture would soon tame the wild horses. But in 1969, the King of the Road stood tall, a reminder that, for a brief moment, Detroit built royalty. Number 1, 1965 Shelby GT350R. The Mustang that went to war. It didn't have the biggest engine. It wasn't the most powerful on paper. But when it comes to pure performance and historical impact, no Mustang in the 1960s hit harder or faster than the 1965 Shelby GT350R. This wasn't a street car with a race stripe. This was a race car barely legal for the street, and in some cases, not at all. Built for SCCA-B production racing, the GT350R was a stripped-down assassin. Only 36 were ever made, each one hand-assembled. Each one bred for competition. There was no rear seat, no sound insulation, no compromise. Under the hood was a blueprinted, high-revving 289 Hypo V8, built by Carroll Shelby's crew in Venice Beach to scream past 7,000 RPM, rated at 306 HP, but dyno-tested closer to 360. The GT350R could go from 0 to 60 in 5.5 seconds, insane for 1965, and handled like a scalpel in a world of sledgehammers. But here's the part that still makes grown men stare off into the distance when they talk about it. The GT350R won. A lot. It crushed Corvettes, Porsches, even Ferraris in SCCA events. Ken Miles himself, yes, that Ken Miles, piloted a prototype to victory at Green Valley Raceway in Texas. It was raw, twitchy, and terrifyingly fast. And that was the point. Everything about this car screamed purpose. The plexiglass windows, the widened rear fenders, the roll bar and fire extinguisher. The snarling side exit exhaust that sounded more like a chainsaw than a car. This wasn't a machine built for boulevard cruising. It was built to dominate. And yet, what made the GT350R truly special wasn't just the performance. It was what it represented. This car wasn't just Ford showing off. It was Ford declaring war on General Motors, on Europe, on anyone who thought a pony car couldn't eat vets for breakfast and still ask for more. For Mustang fans, the Fiat 65 GT350R is sacred ground. It's where the legend truly began, not in marketing, but in metal, blood, and lap times. When you saw one on a trailer at a racetrack, you knew what time it was. And if you were lucky enough to drive one, you didn't forget the sound. You didn't forget the way it shifted, and you definitely didn't forget how it made you feel. This wasn't just a car, it was Ford's war cry, echoing through every corner it ever devoured. They weren't just fast cars, they were statements. Born in an age before traction control, before computers, before the world became too careful, the Mustangs of the 60s were unapologetic, loud, and sometimes dangerous, just like the men who drove them. For a generation coming home from war, or growing up in the echo of it, these cars were more than metal, they were freedom machines. You didn't just buy a Mustang, you bought rebellion. You bought the right to punch the accelerator and leave your worries in a cloud of tire smoke and unfiltered exhaust. They became the backdrop of first dates, Saturday night drags, wrenched knuckles and garage beers. For some, it was the first time they turned a wrench with their dad. For others, it was the car they could never afford but always dreamed about, taped to the wall in a dog-eared magazine, or parked 2 blocks away, always just out of reach. And now, decades later, those same Mustangs sit behind glass at auctions or under dusty covers in forgotten barns. Some have been restored, some rot quietly, but every one of them carries a story. You can smell it when the door creaks open. That mix of gas, leather, and time. The way the seat feels when you sink into it like it remembers you, even if it's your first time inside. That cold metal shifter, waiting for your hand. The engine that growls to life, not like a modern machine, but like a memory, alive, breathing, and just a little pissed off. And that's the thing, these Mustangs weren't perfect. They were raw, they rattled, they leaked, they bit back, but they were real. In a world moving towards silence and software, these cars still scream. They remind us of who we were, of who we wanted to be. They still matter, not because they were flawless machines, but because they captured the spirit of a generation that refused to be tamed. And maybe, just maybe, that's why they'll never die. If you thought the 60s were wild, wait till you see what happened when Ford stopped playing nice. The chrome got louder, the stripes got bolder, and the engines, they roared with vengeance, built to defy insurance crackdowns, emissions regulations, and anyone who said the muscle car era is over. This ride through the fastest 60s Mustangs was just the beginning. Because next we're diving into the forgotten monsters of the 70s, the street beasts, the drag strip legends, the ones Detroit tried to bury, but gearheads refused to forget. So if you ever felt your heart race at the sound of a high-rise cam, or dreamed of lighting up tires on a sun-bleached American boulevard, subscribe now, join Regal Rides, and rediscover your youth, one brutal, beautiful machine at a time. The past isn't gone, it's just waiting in the garage, with the keys still in the ignition.